Hi, and welcome to Module 8 of the Indiana Certified Asphalt Lab Technician Program. This module will cover the audit packet itself, which includes the audit checklist, laboratory equipment, and laboratory equipment calibration and verification. This can be found in Chapter 6 of your ICAT manual. My name is Elizabeth Pastushka. I work for a local contractor in Indiana called E&B Paving. I'm located out of the Indianapolis area, and I am the quality control coordinator for the northern area. This includes mixed design labs and field labs. So I also review test results and mixed designs themselves. I've been doing this for about 5 years. Prior to working for E&B Paving, I worked for the Indiana Department of Transportation in some various roles, all dealing with the asphalt industry. I've been working with the industry for about 16 years now. I have, in my role with the Indiana Department of Transportation, most of my career there, I performed audits on the quality assurance side of things. I also kind of head up and review the quality control plans and the audits that are done for E&B Paving and all of our plants in the northern region. We'll now proceed. This module is broken up into 3 sections, 8A, 8B, and 8C. In this module, 8A, we will be covering the general audit checklist and requirements. As an overview, we'll go over the different types of audits there are. We'll go through INDOT's audit process. Going through that process, we'll talk about what INDOT's responsibilities are and also what the producer asphalt technician responsibilities are. We'll talk about the necessary documentation that both INDOT and the producer have to review during the INDOT process and the equipment calibration and verifications. There are 3 different types of audits. There's a full audit checklist, which is performed every calendar year on HMA plants that produce mix for INDOT contracts. There's a partial audit checklist, and this is done on an as-needed basis, and it is typically done on plants that have already had a full audit and may require INDOT to come back out and do a partial audit for one reason or another. These should be discussed at some point in the earlier year as to why a partial audit would be performed. There is also a no production audit. These are done on INDOT certified plants, but those plants that do not produce any INDOT mixture that year or after the audit from the previous year. And we'll go through kind of each of these differences as we go through the INDOT checklist. What we'll be going through in this module is the full audit checklist, since that is what most of the INDOT certified plants typically go through. For the audit, we need to make sure that the current audit packet is being used. This is available online internally for the INDOT personnel. You can also find it as a contractor. You can find it through the ICAT manual to see generally what last year's audit packet looks like. You also need to review general information, and the persons that are present at the audit need to sign the first page. This is in case there are any questions later on down the road, and we can go back and review and ask those people what was discussed at that audit at that time. Section 1 covers the general instructions. This includes the plant number, and the page number is at the top of each page. Typically, if a district will do multiple audits in a week, you don't want the different audit packets to get confused and mixed up together. So the easiest way to have that not happen is by putting the plant number and the page number at the top. That also ensures that you are working with the same plant and the same, you have all the pages in consecutive order. Each section must have an INDOT audit team member name. This just shows what audit member performed that section. prior to the audit, there's a few things that the audit team or the NDOT team should do. One of those is to review the quality control plan for that particular plant. This shows all of the general information and make sure that that is up to date. You also need to review the previous year's audit, see if there were any corrective actions, and we'll go through what those are, but see if there were any problems or any concerns from the previous year's audit last year. It's also necessary to obtain the asphalt lab technician certifications or qualifications and any independent assurance proficiency testing prior to the audit. You also need to gather a list of NDOT documentation needed during the audit. This includes any lists of approved lists that may be used, and we'll kind of go through what some of those approved lists are. It's just a handy tool to have in case something odd that you find out, and to check and see if it's an approved material. And then there's a terminology section. When filling out the packet, there's really only a few. There's a check mark that shows a satisfactory item. If an item does not meet the requirements, it's marked with an X. And then there's some portions of the audit packet that have an asterisk by them. This is only applicable in some cases. If it is not applicable, then the audit person will just put NA for that particular item. Section 2 covers the general producer information. This is just making sure that the quality control plan general information is correct. These include the NDOT and producer quality control plans have the same date on them, so everybody's looking at the current audit packet. Documentation that shows that who the level 1 asphalt technician is, the certified technician or any qualified technicians that will be working at that plant, and this will include any backup personnel as well. You also need to note if the plant is equipped with a water injection foaming device or if it has modified inline asphalt blending capabilities. Section 3 covers the documentations that are required during the audit. These documents include the current NDOT specification book. Keep in mind that any of these documents can be found or can be kept online or by a hard copy. So the current NDOT specification book, the ICAT manual, which you guys have the most current copy of right now going through this class, but any updated revisions for any subsequent years can be found online. Current ITM, AASHTO, ASTM test methods that are all referenced and are current on file in the QCP. So anything that the producer says, that any test method that they say that they're going to run in the quality control plan needs to be on file. There also needs to be a number of assigned DMFs that are in the ITAP program. And any additional documentation that is needed. This could include fines correction on RAPs or DMFs, any inline blending information if that plant has capabilities to do so, and any fibers information. Section 4 covers the quality control limits for quality control, quality assurance, or QC/QA, HMA, and SMA. In this section, we need to verify the test results are within the DMF targets or the control limits that are identified by the producer. Some producers choose to have a little bit more strict control limits than what is required by the program, which is fine. We just need to make sure that that we're within those capabilities, or we are noting if something falls outside of those ranges. We need to review all state properties for one QC/QA, HMA, PWL if applicable, or SMA mixture from one current or recently completed contract. So typically when being asked for which mix that an NDOT personnel will be looking at and reviewing for that plant, you want to choose a higher quantity mix, which is typically going to be a PWL mixture. We don't want something that only has 1 or 2 tests. We want to look at the consistency of the plant and the documentation that that technician is doing. So as this one PWL contract is selected, if it's applicable, you want to also see if there's an SMA mixture from one current or recently completed contract, because there are different SMA requirements than just regular dense graded mixtures. The quality control limits for QC, QA, HMA, and SMA. All of the test results and properties of that mixture are reviewed during this section. Those properties that are include air voids, the binder content, VMA, which from the VMA you will get the dust to calculated effective binder ratio and the volume of effective binders. So both of those need to be documented, but we need to run the VMA for that. Aggregate stockpiles, we need to have the gradation for those aggregate stockpiles. The blended aggregate, you need to note how the blended aggregate is obtained and the gradation of that blended aggregate. And the recycled materials, what recycled materials are you testing? And you also need to have the gradation depending on the size of the material and the binder content of that recycled material. Section 5 reviews the diary portion. The diary is reviewed and looked at month by month. So the NDOT team member will select a production month within the current year or within the past 3 years. Typically, if you're looking at a PWL contract, you will review the highest produced month of that mixture. So you're kind of looking at that throughout the year. The general requirements per ITM 583 for a diary is that it needs to be on file for 3 years. Again, this can be done by hard copy or it can be done electronically. It needs to have an open book format if you have a hard copy for it. Most contractors might have a 3-ring binder and each page represents a day of production. So you want to keep those days of production separate, otherwise it could get really messy really quick. You want to make sure that you're noting the type of mixture produced and the DMF number as well. This is to be able to go back and track any quantities or any type of discrepancy that may have occurred at the time of production. You also want to note the contract or purchase order number of that mixture and the time that each sample was obtained, whether it is a truck sample or a plate sample, and when the tests were completed. Typically, what most contractors will do as quality control, the test will be completed within a day. So you could have a portion or a note in your diary that says test will be completed within the day, otherwise noted, which kind of indicates to the NDOT personnel that the day that you took that test was the same day that you finished the test. And unless maybe you took the test, you received a plate sample really late, and you had to go back and test it the next morning. In that case, you would show what the test was actually complete, the date that the test was actually completed. Any significant events or problems also need to be noted in the diary. These could include a variety of things. Some of them might be that you were rained out for the day, so no more mix was placed or a small quantity of mix was placed. There could have been something wrong at the plant. The plant could have a hiccup and you ended up shutting down for the day. In those instances, it kind of just notes if test results are found to have problems or an issue because that shows that they're outside of tolerance, then we can go back at a later date and say, oh yeah, at this time we were having a problem with one of the belts on the plant and we had to kind of shut down. So that may cause some errant test results that we were not predicting or that are not representative of that mixture. Each of these diary pages on the days that NDOT mixes are produced need to be signed by a level 1 technician, a certified technician, or management representative. The diary also needs to include any non-conforming tests. These tests that are non-conforming include percent air voids, percent binder content, the volume of effective binder, the VMA, if there's an aggregate gradation that is out or a blended aggregate gradation that's out of tolerance. If you're running a 9.5 millimeter mixture and it's outside of the percent passing limitations and the specifications or control limits. For SMA, there's an aggregate degradation value that needs to be met, and that needs to be noted if it is outside of those limits. The dust to effective binder ratio, there's limitations for that, and they need to be noted if it's too low or too high. Also, we need to note if the moisture content for surface mixtures are outside of the allowable limits. Any of these non-conforming tests will be marked with an X on that item, and a corrective action needs to be noted in the diary what occurred during this time or which test was outside of the limits and what was done for those tests. In some instances, you may have an air void content that may have been a little high. In that instance, a corrective action might be a mix change of some kind, or that you'll be looking, we took a QC truck sample or an information plate sample to kind of verify that particular test results. And then if there's any corrective action taken from there. Section 6 covers the sampling and testing of these materials. Again, you're looking at one mixture produced within that calendar year. So you're looking at the necessary frequency and sampling of testing that has been completed. Some of the tests that are included are for the quality control itself, so anything tested at the plant outside of what a QC/QA mixture will have for plate sampling. These frequencies can be found in the contractor's quality control plan and are documented both in the diary of what's been tested for mixtures, and we should be able to provide to you any test results, and based on the quantities of that material that we're looking at, you can determine the correct number of tests that were needed. So one QC/QA HMA mixture or SMA mixture is selected, and then you determine the quantity of mixture that was placed for that contract, and then you calculate the number of tests per the quality control plan. This is done to verify that all of the testing that we do in the quality control program is done at the proper frequency. Along with mixture testing, there is also testing for recycled materials, aggregate stockpiles, and blended aggregates, and PG binder sampling. The recycled materials need to meet criteria need to document the criteria for the binder content, the moisture, gradation, coarse angularity, and the bulk specific gravity of that recycled material. It's the bulk specific gravity of the aggregates inside of that material. This will be done, there is a page in the audit packet towards the end that actually shows you the calculation for determining the quantity and the number of tests that are required in the audit packet itself. For aggregates, stockpile, and blended aggregates, again, those just need to be documented. And then PG binder sampling also needs to be included in the quality control plan and needs to be verified that it's being done at that frequency. Typically, this is done by INDOT's, how often that INDOT is testing it. So if that's the case, then this is kind of a verification for INDOT. There's different types of mixture sampling. For the plant or truck samples, the required test results are binder content, gradation, moisture, temperatures of the mixture need to be taken. If you're running an open grade or an SMA mixture, you need to have drain down test results. And then if you are running an SMA, the aggregate degradation needs to be checked once per lot of material. For mixture sampling, we also are required to take pavement or plate samples. Um, the plate samples are determined, the random numbers are determined by NDOT. And we typically, as contractors, get side by sides. So we will also run tests to calculate the air voids, VMA. We'll run binder content testing, a gradation, calculate dust to effective binder ratio, the effective binder, the volume of effective binder, and if we're running a surface mix, we have to check the moisture. For HMA sampling, which covers NDOT's 402 mixtures, these are the mixtures that require the Type D certifications. So they're the mixes that go to NDOT jobs that are not plate sampled. The frequency of sampling is one, at least in the first 250, one truck sample within the first 250 ton and each 600 ton of surface or 1,000 ton of base or intermediate thereafter. One HMA mixture for a DMF is looked at and reviewed for that current calendar year or within the last 3 years. These tests include the binder content, core sag angularity, gradation, and air voids. The binder content is required to be plus or minus 7/10 from the DMF, and the air voids are required to be plus or minus 2% from the DMF. These are specification requirements. There is, as I mentioned, a Type D certification that is sent out for these mixtures. The correct number of Type D certifications need to be checked to make sure that the contractor is sending the appropriate number out to the job site and that we're keeping them on file as well. In the frequency manual, it states that a Type D certification for base or intermediate is required for the first 250 ton and each 1,000 ton per day after. For surface, it's required for the first 250 ton and each 600 ton thereafter per day. So every day that we're sending these mixtures to an NDOT job, we have to provide a Type D certification. The test results on these certifications must match the test reports. Now, obviously, if it's the first day of testing and we're putting 50 ton of mix out there on that job, and we have not ran this mix before, we may not have test results. So we would just send a blank Type D test results. If we are able to obtain a test that day, we would send a Type D certification the following day with the test results that we received. So this is kind of NDOT's verification to make sure that the mixtures that are not being tested by an acceptance lab are being tested at the contractor's lab and are being reported correctly back to the job site. Each of the calculations that are performed for these test results need to be verified that they're correct. There have been instances, a lot of these calculations are done in a computer software program or in Excel where there's formulas that are done. Sometimes the rounding gets a little goofy and it doesn't match what NDOT is calculating. So we need to, NDOT personnel need to verify that those workbooks are actually, or computer software programs are actually calculating the appropriate air voids, VMA, and volumetric properties. In order to do this, one QC/QA HMA mixture or SMA mixture is selected to review those calculations. For the mixture testing itself, they will check the air voids, VMA, binder content, fines correction if it's applicable, a gradation, dust to asphalt, effective asphalt binder ratio, moisture content, GSV of the mix, the aggregate degradation for SMA mixtures. They need to verify the GMM calculations, the volume of effective binder, and if there's a calibration calculation for the ignition oven, if a contractor is doing ignition oven for binder content testing. Again, these are all, they need to have the raw data, so anything that has the weights on them, they need to verify that all of these properties and calculations are being performed correctly. This kind of helps, and when we are appealing any test results with NDOT, it kind of shows that yes, those contractor numbers are being calculated based on the weights and everything that we have on our spreadsheets or computer software programs. We also need to provide, as contractors, a blended aggregate sheet. This is so that NDOT can verify that the calculations for gradation and moisture content are being done correctly. And we also need to provide a spreadsheet or something that shows the type of recycled materials that we have and those calculations of test results on those recycled materials. We have to make sure that those reports show binder content, fines corrections if we're running those, gradation and moisture content, core sag angularity, and the bulk specific gravity of that recycled aggregate. Section 7 goes over the HMA plant and the documentation that is required for that plant. These plant documents that are required to be on file include the bill of ladings from the ASC supplier of the current material. This is where NDOT's approved list and having that handy comes into play. The storage and handling instructions from the ASC supplier for the current material that is at that plant. So if we have a PG 64 minus 22 liquid from producer A, we need to make sure that we have that producer's current storage and handling instructions. Each plant calibration for the DMFs. These are typically stored on the plant software or somewhere within the plant, so you'll have to go up to the tower to check that. Any annual plant scale calibrations and meter verifications. These are also on the plant. Usually there's a sticker up in the tower for these plants, or there's calibration paperwork for them. That can be, the calibration paperwork can be found at the plant or the laboratory. If there's post-consumer shingles on the site itself, you need to have an IDEM letter for those shingles. Also, a weigh ticket that was sent to an NDOT contract needs to be available. This can get a little tricky in terms of if there's e-ticketing available at that plant. That may be a plant, like a file that the plant has, so you can look at the e-ticket that might have been sent to the job, or if it is hard copy prints and the jobs aren't running at that time, so they don't have a hard copy. Most plants can print you out like kind of like a dummy weigh ticket, so it at least shows you that the proper things are being documented on the weigh ticket. And a list of those requirements on the weigh ticket are listed in the audit packet itself. You also need to have a type A certification that is current for the PG binder that is at your plant. An inspection of the plant site also needs to be done. There should be a map in your quality control plan or somewhere on file that shows and lists all of the plant components and stockpiles that are at that plant. Many of these plants, there's a few things that are required per the quality control program, which is the plant site layout diagram is correct. Is the lab in the right place where you say it is? Is the plant itself in the right place? Aggregate material stockpile, binder tanks need to be labeled. So in your quality control plan, you will address if there's going to be signage for your aggregate stockpile or material stockpiles or some type of labeling for them. The PG binder tanks at the plant need to be labeled with the asphalt grade that is in those tanks. If there is a baghouse fine addition back into the drum itself, it needs to be documented how that will be done and make sure that that is actually being done at the plant. If the quality control plan states that there is a dust metering system to go back into to return the fines, that needs to be at the plant itself. If there's a fiber addition, if you're introducing fibers into a mixture, that needs to be documented where the fibers are located and how that will be done. The anti-adhesive agent, a lot of people call it soap, that needs to be documented where it is on the jobs, on the site itself, and also what it needs to be labeled out on the plant, which anti-adhesive material that you're actually using. The number of storage silos, um, the capacity of the storage silos, and if they can store mix overnight or for how long they can store the mix is also reviewed at this time. The whatever is shown on the quality control plan layout map and what's documented in the quality control plan need to match what's actually out on the plant site. If the plant is running and you can, as an NDOT person, review the loading for a truck to verify that it is in the correct procedure that the contractor says that it is being done, should be verified if possible. If there's any other process control techniques that are being done, this may include, but it's definitely not limited to any water injection foaming devices or the inline blending capabilities. The next part of the audit checklist is Module 8B. This will cover any laboratory equipment calibration and verification testing methods and frequencies of these testing equipment calibrations.